You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 21st of January 2026 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from the World Economic Forum here in Davos. I'm Carlotta Rebello. Coming up on today's program, Day 3 of Davos is well underway and perhaps the most anticipated by all. US President Donald Trump is en route to the Swiss mountains, but is he set for a frosty reception? Also ahead,
we're now seeing with the ice melting that, the Arctic naval routes are becoming more important and therefore probably more pressing in his view as a strategy objective.
How are Trump's geopolitical objectives reverberating across markets? Then, with Davos nearly doubling its population during WEF, we discover why this can be considered the world's longest pop-up city. And finally, we cross over to Zürich Airport, where we've joined plane spotters for the arrival of Air Force One. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Carlotta Rebello, live from Davos. So welcome to today's briefing, coming to you from the World Economic Forum in Davos. It is set to be a busy day ahead. President Donald Trump is expected to deliver his speech in about an hour, and all eyes will be in the Congress Center and in some of the watch parties happening in the houses too. Well, let's get a bit of a perspective from the ground here in Davos, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Markus de Meyer, the editor-in-chief of Handelszeitung. Hello, Markus.
Hello.
So nice to see you again. It's a little Davos tradition that almost every year on the day that Trump is set to speak, we end up having you on the show. It has been quite different this time around, isn't it?
Yeah, it's true. And thank you for having me again. I'm happy. Yes. Yeah, it's true. It's quite different. Many things are different this time. First, the founder is no more here, who is really standing for this make the world a better place thing. On the other side, everything is concentrated on Trump, who will speak today, but he was already the big topic the last 2 days. And he really doesn't stand for what Davos wanted to be in his history until now.
Now, over the past couple of programs here on Monocle Radio, we've been unpacking some of the strong speeches we heard yesterday from Ursula von der Leyen, Emmanuel Macron, and also Mark Carney. But you have a different perspective, but because you are actually in the room when they happen, what is something that we, analyzing from outside, may have missed?
Yeah, I really wanted to know how do the Europeans react. And when you listen to Ursula von der Leyen, I was disappointed because she made she was just not very specific. And I also thought it's like the advertise your problems speech. She talked about the strengths of Europe, the unity, how they will act together, the competitiveness. In fact, it's almost in every sense, it's the contrary. And she didn't really touch that. The same was, you didn't mention him, the Chinese vice premier was also there. And also with him, it was also this advertiser problem thing. He talked about how open his country is, how they want to open their consumption, to stress and do more for the consumption in the country. Even this is not the case. It's in fact really the weakness of China. And then you had these other two speeches in the afternoon. First, Emmanuel Macron from France, and after that, Carney from Canada. And I think they were more specific. I liked them even more. Macron made very clear where the problems are, and that Europe has a problem here. And even more so, Mark Carney, who really spoke about we have to find a new order, and we have to work on that. Those were the better ones.
Now, when you mentioned there the speech from von der Leyen, so much of it sounds like what we've heard before. Does it resonate any differently?
No, not at all. That's totally true. It's what she said. She really could have used the same speech again, except that she had to touch the latest developments, but not really concrete.
Now, of course, it is a bit of a fool's errand to try to guess what's going to unfold over the next few hours, because the speech by the US president is going to be the talk of the town. Yeah. But do you have any indication from the people you've been meeting, the people you've been speaking to? Of course, is the big USA House this year. Any indication of what we might be getting?
I mean, when you speak with people, the really maybe important thing is nobody knows. I even have the impression even the US delegation don't know. I mean, yesterday I was at a meeting. It was not in the big Congress hall, but in a side show with Scott Bessent, the finance minister. And he just said, yeah, we need Greenland. I mean, this is one of the big topics. No, he didn't say we. He said the president wants to have Greenland. And he just said to the Europeans, so lean back, be calm, don't react too fast. But he didn't say you don't have to fear. He even repeated this threat of higher tariffs.
Well, speaking of higher tariffs, Switzerland is, of course, a nation that knows what it is like to be on the receiving end of this threat. Of course, now you have these other European partners who have dared to go to Greenland, threatened with similar moves. Any advice from someone who's been on the other side in terms of how the Swiss have reacted to that?
Look, I think it's difficult to give a general advice. I mean, you have to have the right moment with this president, with Donald Trump. I mean, Switzerland had also the impression in the first half of the year they had a good deal together with the Trump administration, because everybody from the administration told them, yeah, it will be fine. And in the end, it didn't turn out like that. So I would be very careful to make some rational thinking here, because it's so much irrationality in this whole thing here.
Well, let's try to cut through a bit of the Trump noise, because, of course, while he has been dominating the headlines, there's so much more going on here in Davos. What are some of the other things you've picked up on that might not have to do with the US?
I mean, it's really, I think it was rarely so much concentrated on this political situation. So compared to other years here, it's more in the center. It's really everywhere when you talk with people. It's also in other meetings. It's a topic. I mean, especially for example, I was in a meeting about the market's reaction. It's also like about this, or the security situation. The other topic maybe is still AI, but even AI has a connection here. The use of AI for defense, for example, is a topic. I think it's still the second important discussion here about AI, but much less, really far away from the main topic of Trump, as my impression, I mean, yeah.
And Marcus, just before I let you go, because I know the next hour and a bit is going to be quite hectic, other than watching Trump's speech, is there anything else on your agenda for today?
I go to meetings of banks and private meetings, but this is certainly, even for me, also for me, the most important thing. And then I have to write something, a comment about it, maybe as most of the journalists up here will have to do.
Well, Marcus, good luck in trying to decoding what's set to happen over the next few hours. That was, of course, Marcus de Meyer. A pleasure to have you back on the show, the editor-in-chief of Handelszeitung. Now, let's cross over to Studio One in London, where Monocle's Anita Riotta has the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Carlotta. Spain's Union of Train Drivers has called for a national strike after the country suffered 3 trail derailments in just a few days. The union said it worried for the profession's safety after one of Spain's biggest ever train crashes led to the death of at least 42 people over the weekend. This was followed by a derailment near Barcelona just yesterday that killed the driver and injured 4 passengers. Turkey's President Erdogan has called on Kurdish forces in Syria to disarm. This after a ceasefire with the Syrian government ended clashes in the north of the country. Syrian President al-Shara is hoping to centralize the government in Damascus and has given Kurdish groups 4 days to integrate into the state. And finally, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has announced a new €3 million package to support the country's restaurant industry and hospitality sector. Orban's government will have tourism taxes, waive a tax on entertainment spending, and may introduce energy subsidies. All of this comes as rising prices and the economy remain key concerns ahead of Hungary's presidential elections this April. That's today's news from Midori House. Back to you, Carlotta.
Thanks, Anita. Of course, our Anita Riotta in Studio One in London with the news. Now, as we've been discussing earlier, a minor technical issue forced Air Force One to turn back, meaning that President Trump had to travel using a modified Boeing 757. Instead, the president is now en route to Davos after landing in Zurich just a few minutes ago. Monocle's senior producer Laura Kramer is at Zürich Airport alongside many plane spotters. Laura, hello. How are things where you are?
Hello from Zurich Airport. I have to admit, Carlotta, it's been a long wait, a cold wait, but the president has indeed finally landed. And it's been quite a day because at one point more than 110,000 people were tracking his flight on flight radar. There was also a moment of suspense as we all wondered whether he might actually be landing in a different runway. Luckily, he did touch down in front of the observation platform B, where we are all hoping where we are right now. And on the platform, I have to give you an idea of what it looks like, because earlier it was the serious plane spotters where there are people who are setting up their live YouTube channels. But now there are about 300 people. I'd say still a lot of plane spotters, but a lot of kids too, all very excited to catch a glimpse. The early fog that we had talked about on the Globalist, it has cleared for the most part. The sun is out, so it looks really nice in this winter light. And what I thought was kind of surprising is I expected some cheering, not necessarily for Donald Trump himself per se, but at least for the aircraft, and especially for the fact that after we had all waited so long in the cold, it finally arrived. I mean, I even saw one guy walking around with a can of beer, talk about kind of a legend there, casually enjoying the scene, while armed police and families are gathering in the background to watch all this. I spoke earlier to actually one man who was about to go off to Berlin, Sven Brickhow, and he told me what his biggest surprise was about the landing.
I was really expecting that people will cheer a bit, or at least the mood will be better, more emotions. It was pretty calm, really nobody, sure you heard some people saying, oh, it's coming, but it was really pretty calm. I really thought that there will be more drama.
Well, Laura, that situation about who's coming and if he's finally arriving. Now I have the helicopters behind me, and I'm not sure now if it is Donald Trump arriving with his transfer from Zurich Airport. Has this morning made you or tempted you to head back to Platform B anytime soon? Is plane spotting a new hobby for you now?
Oh, you got me. I'm going to buy myself some binoculars and a massive camera and maybe start my own live YouTube channel, because I have to say this is a lot of fun. And there are so many characters, like I said, people of all ages, little kids around. It's been a great day, but it is off to Studio 4 now for me from Zurich Airport.
Monocle senior producer Laura Kramer there. Do get some more, and you have a subscriber if you do launch that channel. You're listening to The Briefing live from Davos. Now, all this geopolitical tension has, of course, impacted the markets, but also a key conversation topic is AI. So to put all of this in a broader context, I was joined earlier by Ulrike Hoffmann-Buchardi, the CIO for Global Equities at UBS's Chief Investment Office. I started by asking her, with AI dominating the discussion and much of the promenade here in Davos, how has the conversation shifted from investment in AI to actual returns and monetization?
We like to look also at history to learn about how this evolution could unfold. And one thing that we are seeing historically in transformational innovations, that there are typically two stages. One is the layer of the enablers or the stage of the enablers. That typically starts off a new transformational innovation. And then there's a handoff to the application layer, to those companies using a new technology. You saw that with the railroads, where it was first all about the railroads, but then later on about industries making use of railroads, whether it's the real estate sector, the industrial sector, and so forth. And ultimately, the vast amount of value creation happened with the users of a new technology, The same in electrification. Utilities ultimately became regulated, and it was the lighting industry, the appliance industry, factory automation, all these things that ultimately drove much larger value creation. And so I think we may be getting closer to that handover point where we are seeing that, at least in terms of stock market performance, also a catch-up of those companies making use of AI. Other than the structural reasons, I do think there are also cyclical reasons why we could see broadening out. And actually, we at UBS CIO call for the great broadening in 2026. That's our equity market call. And the cyclical part of that narrative is very, very strong this year because we have the largest economies in the world, the US, China, Germany, and Japan, all on fiscal expansion course. And they together are more than 50% of global GDP. But starting with the US, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, that is obviously very stimulative for the economy over time. At its peak, probably 1 to 2% of GDP. In the first half of this year, we think that there will be strong economic growth from both, one, the catch-up from the government shutdown, so the catch-up in spending by the government that now has to take place, but also the tax refunds. So both of them, could be together easily 50 basis points of GDP just in the first part of the year. And then in China, we're still seeing fiscal stimulus. The official budget deficit is about 4%, but then you also have more local spending, more specialty bonds. So could easily be much higher if we take it all together. And then, of course, Germany, no longer the black zero. It ditched fiscal conservatism. And with now 500 billion euros in announced spending on infrastructure and defense, really charters new territories. It's the largest fiscal package since the reunification, and I think will again drive economic growth in particular in this year. And then Japan. Japan also just announced a very large fiscal package, 3.5% of GDP, and that is the largest package since COVID-19. So with all of these economies being on an expansionary path, we think that that's good for global growth. And what's good for global growth is good for equities. In our work, we see that as the main driver on the macro side is real GDP growth.
We know from speaking to you over the years here on Monocle Radio that your job is to make sense of complexity, even in volatile times. But I need to ask you, did you have the US removing Maduro from power, trying to annex Greenland in your Q1 2026 bingo card?
I don't think we necessarily had those exact events in our bingo card, but what we were thinking about for this year, it's certainly that President Trump's political and geopolitical objectives will reverberate across markets. And I think we have seen that in the first few days of the year already. And I think we're going to continue to see that. Greenland, of course, is something that is not new for President Trump. He already expressed an interest in buying Greenland in 2019. And that is because there is a strong strategic interest that he has in Greenland for both reasons of its geolocation and also its rare minerals. So now I think this is another opportunity to take up that topic again. And probably it's only become more important given that we're now seeing with the ice melting that, the Arctic naval routes are becoming more important and therefore probably more pressing in his view as a strategy objective.
That was Ulrike Hoffmann-Bocardi from UBS Chief Investment Office. Well, let's stay in the world of finance and check in with Bloomberg's Ewan Potts, who's down the line for us. Ewan, great to speak to you. We've been hinting at this all morning, but how are the markets taking the latest geopolitical developments?
Hello, Carlotta. I was having read of the press release ahead of the Davos summit, and the World Economic Forum said that it hoped the annual meeting would enable an open exchange of ideas and perspectives. Well, we've certainly seen something like that, but investors, like many world leaders, are really focused on the perspectives of one man, the resident of the White House. And yesterday markets had, something of a Davos tantrum. The trigger, not so much the substance of the whole Greenland business, although of course investors are watching that carefully, but it was Donald Trump's escalating tariff threats, including a possible possible 200% levy on French wine and champagne, and plenty of European voices indicating that the region's not going to take all of this lying down. So that really raises the possibility of some sort of trade war. But fair to say that the moves yesterday were somewhat contained. The S&P 500 lost 2%. It was the worst day since October, and it's looking like stocks will open broadly flat in New York later today. It's certainly not the market rout that we saw back in April over fears of a massive trade war. But remember that stocks have been trading at record highs after really strong gains right across the world last year. So I think it's fair to say that investors are in wait-and-see mode when it comes to all of this. The uncertainty also propelling another trade we've talked about before, and that is gains for precious metals. They tend to rally in the bad times, but of course, they've also been gaining in the good times as well. Year-to-date, gold is now up 12.5%, a pretty hefty gain, and silver is up by almost a third. And we're just 21 days into 2026.
Well, Ewan, you might be now the only person who can do this, but let's go away from Davos because the company behind ChatGPT has been laying out plans for making a return on its investments.
Yeah, this is a Bloomberg opinion piece on OpenAI's monetization plans. It's entitled ChatGPT is starting to look a lot like Facebook. My colleague Pammy Olsen's been digging into the details of ChatGPT's proposals to fix their cash flow problems. Its parent company burned through a whopping $8 billion of cash last year. So for those of us who don't like adverts, probably most of us, there is bad news on the horizon. Those adverts are very much on the way. OpenAI, though, does say it's going to do things differently. Those without a subscription are going to get banner adverts with images at the bottom of their ChatGPT screens. But the company says that advertisers won't influence the chatbot's answers. And in terms of privacy, OpenAI says that it won't sell users' personal data and it's going to keep ChatGPT conversations private. Now, the piece says that there is a decent likelihood of the company being able to keep both of those promises, at least in the short term. But it's OpenAI's final pledge that I think looks harder to maintain. The company is promising that it won't optimize for time spent in ChatGPT. And by that, it means it's not going to make the chatbot attempt to keep users engaged for as long as possible in order to maximize time looking at adverts. Now, I don't know about you, Carlotta, but even now I find that ChatGPT is a bit like one of those friends who doesn't know when to stop talking. So I think this is a pledge that's going to be quite hard to stick to and is also one that's very difficult to measure. So those adverts are coming, so better watch out for them soon.
That was, of course, Bloomberg's Ewan Potts. A pleasure as ever, and we'll be checking in with you again tomorrow. This is The Briefing, live from Davos. And finally today, the arrival of the World Economic Forum's apparatus in Davos means that the number of residents significantly increases when the meeting is in town. But setting up all the houses is not just an exercise in logistics. It also reflects the state of the world around us, where the money is and which nations are open for business. Parag Khanna is a best-selling author, strategy advisor, and the founder and CEO of Alpha Geo. I wanted to hear his thoughts on how the town of Davos adapts to F.
So it's operating on two levels. First, this is really the world's original pop-up city, right? And people don't think of it that way. They think of it as this, pilgrimage to the temple of capitalism. But indeed, as you said, this is a very small, sleepy town. But then for 5 days a year, it probably quintuples in size, and it becomes, in a way, the capital of the world, the capital of capital. All, many, many trillions of dollars represented, 60, 70 heads of state. And again, when you walk up and down the promenade, you see that it is a true mirror of the global diplomatic system. You have an equal number of corporate pavilions, Microsoft, Palantir, Meta, Cognizant, you name it. And of course, the nationalities of those firms. Some are multinationals that you associate with a certain country. Others are stateless companies that really have their tentacles everywhere. And then, of course, the governments. You will have the United Arab Emirates has a fair number of pavilions here represented by the government itself and different sovereign wealth funds. Qataris are here, so you have a strong Gulf presence. We're right here next to the Saudi pavilion, for example. And of course, Europeans, and then the USA House is closest to the Congress Center. So you've got the governments, you've got the corporates, and you have tons of civil society. Goals House doing all of the sustainability work. That is actually what modern or postmodern, you might say, diplomacy is today. It's this multi-stakeholder, which is actually the term that Klaus Schwab himself made famous over the past 50 years when he founded and led the World Economic Forum. So I really think that Davos, the event, is this perfect embodiment of this multi-stakeholder character of global governance today. And then there's the themes where you're, of course, reacting. You have Trump here. You've got, Mark Carney's sizzling speech yesterday, sort of warning that the old world order is broken and so on and so forth. But then you also have these long-term agendas that continue to get driven forward. Sure, people will criticize and say that climate is not getting the same amount of attention as it did in years past, and everything is AI. Again, you're reflecting the tone of the world. So in some ways they're reacting, in other ways they're pushing a certain agenda forward.
Now, looking back at some of the speeches, they all kind of seem to this idea that the world order as we knew it is over. And von der Leyen mentioned how nostalgia is not going to bring it back. That immediately made me think of you, because this is something that you've been saying for a while, the fact that being hung up on nostalgia of how things used to be for nations is perhaps what's holding everyone back.
Exactly. And so I would go one step further, and I've always said, forget about rebuilding the past, because clearly it's fallen apart because not enough people support it. It's what is the next world order that actually has not necessarily a consensus, but a pluralistic or strong base of support. And that, as you can clearly see prior to this annual meeting and certainly during it, is everyone connecting with everyone else. So it's Mark Carney arriving here from Beijing, right, where he announced another raft of deals and agreements with them. It is the Europeans engaging with India and the Asians. It's the Arabs making connections with Europeans and Asians and everyone else. So all of that is a sign or reflection of the new patterns of connectivity among greater and lesser powers, either circumventing the United States, which they actually did a lot anyway, but even more so, and then the U.S. realizing that it doesn't want to get cut out of that action, and so they're here as well. And so there is a new equilibrium in sight, one that is more distributed, more multipolar, small and large states, sort of coexisting together, practicing what I call multi-alignment, not choosing only is this a pro-American conversation or an anti-American conversation, but rather everyone is just finding an accommodation with each other and gaining maximum advantage from each relationship. And that's actually a beautiful thing.
Thanks, Parag. That was Parag Khanna, the strategy advisor, founder and CEO of AlphaGeo, and author too. And that's all for this special edition of The Briefing, coming to you from the World Economic Forum. It was produced by myself and Desiree Bandley here in Davos, and our studio manager back in London was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing is back in Davos tomorrow at the same time, live from our pop-up radio studio here in the Hub Culture Pavilion right off the promenade. And do tune in to the Monocle Daily later this evening, which is coming to you from Greenland. Monocle's Andrew Muller and Alexis Self will be bringing you the latest news from Nuuk at 1800 London time, 1900 if you're listening in Davos. I'm Carlotta Rebello. Goodbye and thanks for listening.